Well, the federal government's response to allegations of sexual violence is a story that's not going away. So many of us are feeling angry, disillusioned and tired. But there are people trying to hold the government to account, and one of them is independent MP Zali Steggall, and she joins us now from Sydney. Good morning, Zali.
Good morning.
Great to have you on the show. You've been a strong voice for equality and justice over the past distressing weeks. Perhaps start by telling us, do you think the penny has dropped? Do you think the Prime Minister is beginning to understand the extent of anger in the community, especially amongst women?
Look, I'm not sure that the penny has fully dropped, because when I look at the cabinet reshuffle that happened yesterday, there's a lot of band-aids, I would say, being put around, a lot more women roles being created, but I'm still not seeing concrete action, firm commitment to things like the Respect at Work report, like amending the Sex Discrimination Act. I'm seeing a lot of still words when it comes to who's in cabinet and what they're going to do, but not firm commitments that we can actually hold them to account to.
Zali, you've put forward some changes to the Sex Discrimination Act to try to move the needle on this. You know, I'm still unfortunately wondering if we're in the spin cycle rather than the action cycle, and your reference to Band-Aid solutions speaks to that. You know, sending people off empathy training seems like a fairly half-hearted step. What do you think it's going to take to actually result in a change rather than just this circular conversation that we keep having?
Yeah, I think it's going to take is a wake-up call to the Prime Minister. So I think some polling that shows that satisfaction with his performance is down. I think people really indicating that this is impacting their voting intention. I think that all of those indicators are things the Prime Minister takes more seriously than maybe doing the right thing, which is taking firm action. Now, empathy training, I've tried to discuss that with even my teenage children, and they are laughing at the concept of grown men having to go and do empathy training, and people who have been in the job for a very long time. It is ridiculous. The only thing that can be done is that they be asked to resign. In the corporate world, there would be no question that that is what would happen.
So that's what should happen to Andrew Laming?
Look, I think, again, the proper course has to be done in terms of the allegations against him, but there seems to be a rather large body of allegations in relation to conduct that is really questionable. Now, our kids, our the police, in every profession, you get hauled in if you're caught in that kind of behaviour. It beggars belief that at the moment it's go off and do some empathy training and have some time off on leave. But I think it's a broader question. I think the Prime Minister is still being political in his response here. He's looking at his political survival. He's worrying about his numbers in the House instead of worrying about what's right. But ironically, worrying about your political survival could ultimately cost you your political survival, because what I'm hearing is a lot of people are very dissatisfied with the response, that it hasn't been good enough, and there hasn't been any concrete firm announcements such as commit to the Respect at Work report recommendations, amend legislation, put in place, commit to debating the legislation that is currently before the House to ensure professional standards for members of Parliament and their staff. I mean, there are some real things the Prime Minister could be doing to very much take the lead on stamping out this toxic culture in Parliament and saying, right, enough is enough. From here forward, this is a whole new set of standards that we are going to expect and hold you to. But they're not doing that. They're still talking about investigating, looking, a little bit of empathy training. It really is, it's just words.
Is the culture worse? Oh, sorry, Zoe. Is the culture worse in Parliament than any other workplace?
Well, look, I'm not qualified to comment on all workplaces. I can talk to the environments I've experienced. I was a professional athlete for a good about 14 years. I certainly experienced and observed some pretty interesting behaviour, and sports people tend to be criticised a lot for when they misbehave. I've then spent 10 years at the New South Wales Bar, and now as a barrister. That's a very patriarchal profession. The legal profession has its problems. They're investigating it. And I certainly saw some inappropriate behaviour there, but also I think a system that is engaging with its problem and knows it has to do something about it. I've been on a number of boards where I know from a corporate point of view, boards are very much engaging with this problem and what do they have to do to ensure equitable representation on boards, equitable rules and regulations, constitutions that get amended, and processes put in place to ensure good diversity and good equity at board level. Now, what I'm not seeing in Parliament is that same professional approach and standards. I was shocked when I went into Parliament to find out that there were no professional standards for MPs.
The Prime Minister speaks a lot about the Canberra bubble, and I'm sort of thinking it's now a behavioural bubble as well as a figurative bubble in other ways. Can you speak to just what it's like being a female MP in federal Parliament? You know, other women who've worked there have talked to even themselves becoming desensitised to the behaviour that it's around them, that you kind of become used to it because that's the world in which you exist, and it's only when you step out of it that you go, oh, that was actually not appropriate. What kinds of things do you experience?
Well, look, I think I've come into it as a mature age. You know, I've had my professional experience, so I don't think I'm coming into it naive or I am coming into it with my eyes wide open. I think as an independent, I do have a different experience. I don't have to do the whole party room shenanigans. I don't have to do all that networking. I don't have to have those rivalries within the same team. I mean, that's surprised me a lot, is how much behind the front line of each party there is a lot of competition and cutthroat negotiating going on. It's a very competitive environment, so I don't have that, but what I have observed is a number of members of Parliament who are really quite out of touch, I would say, with what is accepted as good social norms and certainly good professional norms. So people who maybe have been in Parliament for too long or have come from backgrounds where they haven't had to engage in a professional way with staffers, with media, with colleagues. And I would say their conduct is often quite inappropriate. Look, I haven't experienced anything myself, but I'm very conscious that I have a lot of young staff, men and women, and I'm very conscious of what experience they have and to make sure that it is at all times appropriate. I guess maybe I'm fairly outspoken, so I don't think anyone would mess with me lightly.
Well, Zali, let's look at some immediate steps that could be taken to address the cultural problems, beginning with quotas. The Prime Minister has said he's open to quotas, but we all know that historically the Liberal Party has been allergic to them, let's say. Where do you stand on quotas? Do you think they're a good way of sort of breaking down masculine norms?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully support quotas. When in my board roles, I was always very much pushing for 50-50 or a 50-50, if not, why not? So there has to be a good reason why it shouldn't be an equal representation, or at the very least, the 40-40-20 model to ensure good diversity. So I have no issues with quota. I very much support them. I think we have to be real. When, the merit argument gets trotted out, it's rubbish, because at the end of the day, you can twist and turn merit to suit yourself, and there's always so much unconscious bias that goes into decisions. People will generally pick what reflects themselves, and so a very patriarchal system, or a system that is dominated by men, will continue to engender more men being given opportunity or recognised for roles, always on the basis of merit. it's clear in Parliament there are quotas in so many ways. When you look at the deal or the arrangement between in the coalition between the Nationals and the Liberals, there's clearly a question of quota as to how many front bench position ministerial roles are given to each party. So that's a quota system. That's not a question of merit, of is each MP put into a cabinet role absolutely the best person for the role? More often than not, what you have is factions being represented. You have the Nationals, they have their quota. You have the more conservative side of the Liberals, they also have a quota within the minister roles, and then you'll have the more centre ones. So there are quotas happening all the time. It is rubbish to suggest that everyone is in their role on merit.
There's been some analysis floating around that you could almost fix this imbalance in one cycle if you physically kind of blocked men from standing in particular seats. I mean, I feel like that's a huge leap from where we are now. And I just wonder where that will is going to come from if we circle back to the beginning of this conversation, which was that really we're still at the tinkering around the edges part of this conversation, incredibly, and action is still all in front of us.
Yeah, look, I think, yes, we can change a lot by having, I think if the coalition and the Liberals especially have quotas, I think that will help a lot. We have to be really clear. It needs to be putting women into safe seats just as much as hard seats, because invariably women are up for the challenge of fighting over marginal seats, and so then but it's not, there isn't the same security. But we also have to talk about the advisor roles and the senior roles in departments to really do an audit of how many female advisors are there in senior roles. I'm not talking the junior advisor, but the chief of staff. How many chiefs of staff are women within the Liberal Party at the moment? How many ministers have female chiefs of staff? I think that they are the important questions as well, because this is a whole ecosystem that feeds on itself. And so you need to have that respectful workplace across all levels, not just who are the MPs and ministers, but who are the chief of staffs, who are the media advisors. The whole ecosystem needs to be more balanced. I think by nature of having more women in there, you will just cut down, I think, just opportunity for misbehaviour. When I look at the Labor Party, I don't think that they haven't got their problems. I think they've definitely had their misbehaviour. But the simple reality that when they look around their party room, that they have a much greater spread of men and women means, your opportunities for bad behaviour get cut down. And I think with numbers comes a willingness to speak out when maybe someone is being inappropriate. So it's a very interesting time. I think a lot of women have taken matters into their own hands, like me, and ran as independents. I couldn't, for me, I thought it was so much more important to be true to my values and true to the electorate than to be part of a party as a way of coming into politics. And I know Helen Haynes, for example, represents Indi, Rebecca Sharkey represents Mayo. You have someone like Jackie Lambie that's really strong and powerful. And look, someone like Pauline Hanson, I don't agree with her politics, but she's certainly been a strong independent voice for her own views. So I think women have been more prepared to do it alone than have to toe a party line. So it's a very interesting time. And look, I do hope for good of democracy that we can get more diversity into our politics.
Mm. And Zali, what about the role of the Minister for Women in creating change? I mean, Marise Payne has been heavily criticised throughout this sort of bleak period in Australian politics. And I heard the Prime Minister yesterday describe her now as effectively the Prime Minister for Women. What did you make of that comment? To me, it sort of implied that he wasn't the Prime Minister for women.
Look, it was strange. And again, I don't understand. To me, it was either an abdication from him of the responsibility of fixing this problem and of addressing the responsibility of having equitable policies and making sure that he, as Prime Minister, puts in place policies and programs that address the inequities that we have and the very serious problems. And so it's nearly like it was a hospital pass to the minister that somehow she's now going to be responsible for all of this, and it's off his sort of diary. And at the same time, she doesn't have those wide sweeping powers to ensure that she actually makes a difference on these really important issues. I have been very critical of her because I think if you're going to be Minister for Women, you actually have to go out to the March for Justice and listen to women. I'm just sorry, but you cannot be in that role and command respect for being in that role and do nothing with it. I think part of the anger and frustration that so many women are feeling is we've had enough with the posturing, enough with people having the title but doing nothing with it. So a Minister for Women, well, show us what you're going to do with that role.
Zali, I just want to jump in just before we let you go and kind of go back to the nuts and bolts things to protect women in the parliament, because I feel like we're on a two-track conversation here. One is a much bigger picture cultural shift, and the other is simple workplace safety and some basic actions that can be taken to make sure that everyone's in a safe workplace. What do you make of these suggestions of alcohol bans, drug testing, for example, and the sorts of penalties that should be imposed on people in that place who don't behave appropriately? And those are things that could happen virtually overnight, I would think.
Absolutely. I would support all that. It is a very strange workplace, if I could say. Having spent 10 years at the bar as an athlete, I've experienced a lot of different environments, but it is a very unusual work environment. They're very long days where you might start with media and other things very early, like so in Parliament from sort of on the go, on show from say 7 to 7:30. Then the House doesn't stop sitting until 8 o'clock for the House of Reps. And literally from the time the session starts, you are on call at any time to have to run down to the chamber for a vote. So you don't have like an hour for lunch where you can go off and do something. The only official break there is in proceedings of the House is between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. So 1:30 to 2 o'clock is when you can have 90-second statements, and then question time starts. And so it's basically the only time when there's really a little bit of, certainty, 30 minutes of you knowing that you're not going to have to run down for a vote. So you cannot leave the building. You can't, it's a very, my diary is booked out in 15-minute slots of different groups and organisations that want to come and share with me their reports and findings and lobby on behalf of a cause. So it's a very, very full-on day, and I think for a lot of people it ends up being very poor eating habits and drinking, possibly turning to drugs to sustain energy over the day, and that is a real worry. So I do agree that more normal work hours for the House to sit. If we have to schedule more sitting days, then that's fine, but make them more reasonable days in length. I don't have a problem with drug or alcohol testing because I think we have a duty as members of Parliament. We are there representing our electorates. It's a privilege, not a right, and we have a duty to do it to the best of our abilities, and that means, doing it with full capacity, not impaired. So, I definitely would support all those kind of measures.
Well, Zali, thank you for your voice, for your commitment to change, and for joining us on Broad Radio this morning. We know you're very busy. We really appreciate it. Continue all the good work.